the title of this is Becoming a Full Professor, Understanding Context, Overcoming Barriers, and Creating Mentoring Relationships. Monica told you about my background, but I want to share a couple of extra things with you about that. When I was in the K-12 arena for about 20 years, and then I took a position as the superintendent director of a research school at Florida State University. So in that position, I was interacting with university personnel. They were coming to my school, was working with the president, the deans, and all of those people. And I realized at the time, I don't understand this context. I don't understand this culture. And every place we go to, every place we work, every position we're in has its own culture. And part of becoming a full professor successfully is understanding that culture. That's where I became aware of it. And that's where I started my first mentoring relationship after 20 years. It was too long, but that's where I learned about what a difference that can make. And it's something we'll talk about today. So here's what we're going to look at. We're going to take about 10 minutes to talk about the status of the professorship in the US, just to give you an understanding of that. And then we'll have a short breakout where you can talk to each other, meet each other, think about what you've learned so far. Then we're going to look at reasons for becoming a full professor, barriers to promotion, and strategies for achieving promotion to full professor. Then we'll have a second breakout room where you can converse and talk about this and any questions that you might have, so your leaders can look at that for the future. And then we'll look at creating mentoring relationships to support promotion. Because one of the most important things you can do in your life and your profession is to engage in mentoring relationships. Then we'll have a breakout room 3 where you can talk about that, and we'll end with closing remarks. So let's get started. This might be surprising. There's about a little over 130,000 faculty members in the US, and the average age is 46. And if you look at male, female, it's quite similar. And the LGBT is about 16% reported. Racial composition, you can see that the majority are white, followed by Asian and Hispanic Latino, Black, African American, mixed race, and unknown. Then we look at the schools of planning, and I couldn't put these next to each other because they're reported somewhat differently, but you can see that the breakdown is similar. 66 rather than 66.1, 10.4 for Asian rather than 11. The difference, the only really big difference is that there is a lesser amount of Hispanic Latino. In the general population, it was about 11, and here it's 6. Here, this is also reporting the Native American, which you can see is just a very small percent there, and then other, and then foreign, which was not reported in the first composition. But here's something really interesting. Of all the faculty in the US, only 37% are in tenure track positions. So if you're on that position, that's an elite position. And of those, only 10% are tenured right now, 10%. And look at the breakdown of the number that are full-time and part-time contingent, which is something that is happening even more and more in the universities today. Maybe that's happening in yours. But I put this here because I want you to really think about this. You know, and I know that the power in our departments and in our profession is with the full professors. So you need to be there. You need to be there to assure that our profession is as it should be. You need to be there because what you do is important. So I want you to really look at this and think about this as we proceed. In accredited schools of planning, 57% of faculty are male and 43% female. And when we look at tenure, it's a little bit closer. And apparently from your literature, you've made some real progress in that area. But if you look at let's look at the demographics of tenured faculty in accredited schools. And I highlighted that because I wasn't sure exactly how many, what percentage. I wanted to be sure that you were getting accurate information, understanding what you're looking at. So as you can see, the majority of faculty here, as we said, is white. And if you look at tenure figures across the spectrum, you can see some differences. Of course, the percentage of faculty is small. But this is what we look like in tenure in schools of planning. I'll give you a minute to look at it. Now, here's another interesting stat. Between 39 and 50% of tenure track faculty members become full professors. Less than half. Now, it may be different in your institution, but this is overall. Again, I go back to the fact that these are the people who make the decisions. These are the people who create our cultures. These are the people who determine what research is important, what research is not. You need to be there. That's why you're here today. I'm just saying this over and over again because you do need to be there. If we look at the gender race of full professors in the US, we see some things that are a bit different than what we saw before. We see that the majority are male, and then there's a small amount that is not identified. This is what we see in the full professorships in the US today. So why? Why do we see the gender and ethnic discrepancies in the professorship? This is what the research says. Females still spend more time with family, takes more time out of their work, takes more time, of course, taking time out when you have a child, which is supposed to be okay, and you're supposed to be on time that you get extra time for that, family leave in many places. But when it comes time to look at what you've produced, sometimes people don't remember that, think about, build that in. But it does take, I know I had a young woman that went through that and had an ill husband. And when she was ready to go for full professor, people hadn't really thought about that. So she had some downtime, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, how you deal with that. Female and minority groups do tend to be younger, and you are seeing a movement. You are seeing that there are getting to be more people of color, more women who are moving up and into the professorship. So the fact that they're younger does make a difference. But here's a really important thing, and I'm going to talk about that again later. The research topics that female and minority groups do often are related to their groups, often related to minority issues, often related to people being left out, often related to issues of fairness, all kinds of things like, well, these things are not always as well accepted, not only by the colleagues you're working with, but by journals and some organizations. Obviously, it's not your organization because I've looked at what's come through what you're doing, but some organizations that might be harder to make presentations on these issues. Here's another one. And if you're in this, if you're a person who assigns people to committees, or if you're a person of color or minority or female, service assignments you take on because you care about this. You care about these issues in your own places and other places. Sometimes you get assigned to these things. They take a lot of time. I'm not saying don't do them, but I'm saying be aware of how much time it's taking away from your research, and that probably is not going to be considered when you go up to be a full professor. It may in some places. If you can connect it to your research and you can connect it to your other work, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying be aware, because perhaps there might be a time when you take a little leave from doing some of that so you can concentrate on getting your research out there. And of course, there are always issues of overt or covert discrimination that occur. So this is what the professorship looks like in the US today. We're going to take a little break. I know it's a quick little talk here, but we want to give you some time to just absorb it and think of that, maybe get to know each other. If you don't already have a tablet or a computer or a phone or paper or something that you can write notes on, why don't you go ahead and do that at this time, because we will have 2 other breaks as we go ahead. So we'll give you a 15-minute break. And we ask you to share these questions to the point that you can. You may not get to all of them. Why have you joined this workshop today? I commend you for being here. It shows a real dedication. So why did you join? And who are you as an academic today? Where are you? Are you an associate? Are you assistant? I see there's some people who are students. Wonderful that you're here today. Maybe you're someone who's already a professor and you're here today to help others or to look at what you can do to make things better. And if you have time, what surprised you or concerns do you have? And if you don't have time to talk about it, you might want to jot that down. Or I know there's a chat room not a chat room, but I know you can make comments and you might want to put those in there. So we'll take a break and I'll see you back in 15 minutes. And thank you for coming back. And we've got some new people joining us. I want to thank the people who facilitated and served as facilitators. Thanks so much for doing that. And the recorders for taking notes. I hope you had a good conversation. So now let's get into the meat of things. Planning to become a full professor. We're going to look at the realities of that. And first, I'm going to talk to you about why. Why should you become a full professor? Because my goal is that everybody in this room today who is not a full professor leaves with the tools to become a full professor and the desire to become a full professor, because you know what? You need to do it. Remember those figures, the percentages that actually become full professors? And you know, and I know that it's the full professors who make the decisions, who create the environment, who create the culture. You need to be one of those. They're personal rewards, of course, accomplishment, self-esteem, more income, more possibilities for sabbaticals, which are just wonderful, and you want to do that in your career. Greater respect and status in the department. But look at the last one, more power to create change in the department. If you're happy with your department, then being a full professor, you can maintain that culture. But if you're not, then you can be the one that helps change it. There's institutional awards, higher status in the department, improved opportunities for professorships, greater possibilities for internal awards, and advanced potential for advancement in the institution if you're thinking that you want to become an administrator of some type. And again, and I'm emphasizing this, power to change the institution. If you like the way the institution is and you're a full professor, you can help maintain it. But if you don't, if you see changes that need to be made and you're a full professor, you have a better chance of doing that. And then there's the external awards, superior status in the profession, more visibility for your work. I can tell you that when you become a full professor, people look at your work in a different way. More people come to your presentations. People see your name. They read your things. It is easier to get published because people know you. They know your work. They see your work. They see that you're a full professor. They'll come to you. Awards and titles. And I'm not talking here about ego. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about the profession. When you become a full professor and you get some type of wonderful award out there, then that says something about your institution and your department. It brings honor to them. It brings them something special. It helps people to see, wow, that must be a great place. Those must be good people. They must have an understanding of what our work is all about. So, and then there's, of course, enhanced response job opportunities anywhere you want to go. Enhanced power to change the profession. If you like what's going on, great, then help maintain it. And if you don't, help change it. Again, it's not about ego. It's about being a responsible person in your profession, being the person that helps to frame the future and maintain the present when it's really good and powerful. And here's a really, maybe a challenging quote, a surprising quote. It's not just as difficult to achieve the rank of full professor as it is to achieve the rank of tenured associate professor. It is more difficult. And because it is more difficult, it does require planning, thinking, mentoring, preparation. Again, that's why I commend your leaders for putting this on today, because it's so needed. We're going to look at the barriers first before we come to how you overcome them. Here's some of the barriers that the literature tells us about. One is ageism. And this is very interesting because we're not talking specifically about older people. We're talking about younger people. There is a hesitancy to tenure, to promote people who are 40 or under 45. And if you've come directly through, you might be under 45 and you might be a superstar, but there's still a reluctance there. The time in rank averages 5 years. There are some institutions that actually tell how many years you must be in rank, but most don't. So the average is about 7 years. And there's some reluctancy to promote too soon. Again, I mean, I was in a situation when I was an associate. I wasn't an associate, I was associate professor, so I couldn't vote on this. But we had a young man in our program who was a superstar. I mean, he was so well published, he was so well known, he was doing just beautiful work, and he's a wonderful young man, great teacher, just fantastic. And he wanted to go up early, 1 year, wanted to go up 1 year early. And the full professor said, no, you need to wait your turn. No. Just wait. You don't have quite enough, just wait. And so what did he do? He left. But it happens. And sometimes there's discrimination against people if after 10 years or more, if they've been there for a long time, and maybe they've had some time when they didn't produce as much, family issues, ill issues, whatever. And they get to get used to seeing them as an associate, and they are reluctant to even apply. And sometimes when they do apply, people kind of think, well, they're probably not that good. If you have, if you have been in rank for over 10 years, and you had a period or less, and you had a period where maybe you weren't producing as much, there's ways to deal with that. So don't think about that. If you're in that situation, just put that aside, because we're going to talk about that today. You go ahead, you apply, you get ready, you prepare, because you're going to be a full professor. Gender and race, we did talk about the assigned service responsibilities related to gender and race that sometimes take time from people so that they don't have the time they need to concentrate on their research or their teaching or their service. And as I said earlier, that research focus has less prestige, and your planners of color interest group found that and reported that to you. So that is a real thing. If they're focused on research that is focused on these issues, sometimes it's more difficult to get published. And also institutional heritage. There are 46 planning programs, 10 are private, 2 are HBCUs, and 32 are public research institutions. But 5 universities account for a third of the faculty in accredited programs in your area. Now, I'm not saying anything about these people. They're good people, they're well-trained. All of those things are true. But if you come from those 5 universities, you tend to have connections. You tend to have already coming in. You know who the journals are. People know you because you've gotten connected. You've gotten connected through each other. And there is a bit of an advantage there. There is an advantage there. There's definitely an advantage there. But if you don't come from those, then there's a little barrier for you. You have to do more. You have to do more in terms of getting connected and understanding the culture and understanding how to become a full professor. Timing. As I said earlier, average time and rank is about 7 years, and most people receive it in their mid-40s. For people who are in work areas that are applied and they were in the field first and they come, then the ages might be a little later. But here's the reality. If you apply early and you succeed, well, then you become the superstar. But if you apply early and you fail, then sometimes you're looked at as somebody who's arrogant, and you might go into the never promoted pool. So you need to think about it. People who apply after many years, maybe 15 years, even more, sometimes they're just discounted because people think of them as they're associate, they've been there, they're a good teacher, they're this, but they don't think of them as being promotable. Now, some places people get honored if they stay around for a long time. I was in a situation where we had someone in our department who had been there for probably 40 years. And she was well loved. She was a wonderful teacher. She didn't do a lot of research. And in the last 3 years, somehow they got her promoted to full professor. Doesn't happen often, and you don't want to be there. You don't want to be at the last years to get this. You want to do it now, soon. And then there are personal barriers. We talked about family responsibilities, male or female. Sometimes family responsibilities take us away from being able to do the things we want to do in our own research and teaching and service. The gaps in the publications and research, sometimes people will feel like that should hold them back. I had a colleague that felt that way. She had family responsibilities. Her husband was sick. She had periods of time when she didn't publish. She's been there 20 years, and she got promoted last year because a lot of us told her, just go ahead and do it. You've got the record now. You can take care of that. So if that's an issue, we'll talk about that again. Don't let that stop you. Some other barriers, not really understanding how to make connections in the field. You have to be connected in the field. You have to be known. You have to learn how to do that. You have to go to conferences, and we'll talk about doing that. I'll give you some strategies for doing that. But it's very important, and we'll talk more about that later. Sometimes people take on administrative duties or responsibilities, and when they do that, it's very difficult to continue to do research, publish, do outstanding teaching, do public service at the level that's needed to become a full professor. I have a colleague who's done that recently. He's an associate professor, and he's become the chair of the department. I suggested you not do it. If you want to become a full professor, it's really difficult to do that and keep your publishing and keep everything going. So think twice about doing that. If you do it for a limited time. Inadequate planning to become a full professor. You really have to plan for this. It takes time and you have to plan strategically, have to be strategic about doing it. And then there's the issue of procrastination or insecurity, feeling that, well, I really haven't done enough. Maybe I'm not ready. In fact, the research shows that women tend to go up to be full professors about 3.5 years later than men. And some of this is related to issues of females feeling like they need to take more time, or and of course we go back to the family issues as well. But if you're a procrastinator or you're insecure, you got to get rid of that. And one of the ways to do that is through mentoring, and we'll talk about that. There are personal relationships and clashes, and there are political power dynamics. They're realities for some people. They're hurtful, they're difficult, but they're not impossible to overcome. So we will talk a bit about that as well. You can deal with it. I've heard people say, well, they're never going to let me become a full professor. I'm going to tell you something. If you do the work, and I'm going to say this over and over again, and we'll talk about what the work is. If you do the work, even if you have these issues, you can overcome them because there are people above them. And if you do the work and you have the record, you can do it. I've seen it done. Now, there are institutional barriers, and these are realities. In most places, there are some places this may not be true. But in most places, these criteria to become a full professor, they change without notice. All of a sudden, it's a different thing than it was 5 years ago. They're very subjective, they're vague, and they tend to be not really transparent. And there's a lack of flexibility in the types of contributions that count. Research tends to count everywhere. When you're looking at public service and teaching, it's a little bit more difficult. Not impossible, but more difficult. Language tends to be unclear, and there are loopholes so that those people who maybe don't like you or aren't looking at your record or have problems or issues or whatever, which are not supposed to be part of the decision-making, allows them to vote no. And it does make it difficult to prepare or to challenge, but not impossible, not impossible. And then the lack of program understanding in a department. Many of your programs are in departments like mine was in, where I wasn't in a leadership department. I was in a department that did primarily research, and they were primarily quantitative researchers, and they didn't really understand what our program and what we were doing. So we had to educate them. And that's something that you may have to do yourselves and make sure they understand, what do people in planning do? What is important in your field that might not be important in their field? And that's part of preparation. Now that we've talked about the barriers, let's talk about becoming a full professor, because that's what this is about today. As I said earlier, my goal is for everyone that walks out of this room who is not a full professor to be starting to prepare tomorrow. And those of you, I noticed there were some of you that are assistant professors. This, I hope, will make you understand that you just keep on going after you get that associate. And those of you that are students, that when you get into the profession, your ultimate goal is to become a full professor. You can do it. It requires planning and, of course, doing the work. When you go for full professor, you focus on one area. So you're going to go for either research, teaching, public service, outreach, but you are expected to be satisfactory in the others as well. So you need to assure that you're satisfactory in all, but outstanding, at least in this one. So let's look at what the research says counts in general. A survey of doctoral and non-doctoral granting institutions found that 6.2%, 6.2% of deans selected teaching as the most important work of the professor. I think that's quite astonishing. And in doctoral institutions, it was only 1.6%. So if you're going to go up in the area of teaching, you really need to prepare and know what you're doing and get things together. And I understand that you're going to have a session at your conference that's people are going to share who have gone up for teaching and for research and for public service. So go to that because that's wonderful. Again, don't let this discourage you. Just be aware and understand so you can plan. Now, at smaller private non-doctoral institutions, teaching and public research may be more important than indicated here. And public service and outreach may be more valued in land-grant institutions if you're in one of those. Again, research tends to be highly valued everywhere. Teaching and service and outreach varies. So let's get started. Got to learn what counts in your institution. Read and study the guidelines. Start now. Talk to others who've been promoted inside and outside of your institution to find out what they did, how they did it, what barriers they ran into, and find out about these unwritten rules that are floating around, because there are unwritten rules. There are some things like we talked about, well, don't go early. That might be an unwritten rule. Whatever it is, they're there. Now, this one is really important. Examine the dossiers of those in your area who have been promoted in the last 5 years. Look at what they've done. Take notes. Now, this can help you if by some chance you do not get promoted, because you will have the information you need to challenge that. But also, more importantly, because you are going to get promoted, more importantly, it gives you some guidelines. It shows you what you're going to have to do. If there haven't been that many promotions in your institution, you might look at similar programs in your institution or similar institutions outside. But be aware, requirements change and you may have to do more than others. I had that experience at my institution. Again, if you go back to what I talked about earlier, things change. Just be aware, be knowledgeable, and be prepared. That's how you get prepared, by gaining knowledge. You develop a plan for success. Create a timeline. When do you want to be ready to be promoted? And develop a plan of action. Within that plan of action, you want to decide whether you're going to go for teaching, research, public service, or outreach. Then you create strategies and procedures to connect research. If you're going to go for teaching and public service, you want to connect research to it. So if you're in looking at public service or outreach that you've done, you want to have published on it. You want to have demonstrated that other people are using your work. You want to show that you have a national or international presence and that people know what you're doing. If you choose one of those areas, you publish on it. You might do books on it. You make sure that information, that it's your research, what people call research, is connected to your public service and your teaching. And we're going to go into that in more detail in a moment. So here are some sample research outcomes. I don't have everything here, but these are some things that count. And again, what counts at your institution? What are they looking for? What have other people done? When you go for research, you're expected to have extensive publications, and it depends on your institution. Particular journals hold more weight than others. You want to look at the impact statistics of your work, but find out what counts. Do you have to be in a particular journal in your institution, or is it more open than that? Books, authoring books. Some places you must have a book, 1, 2 books. Some places they look at books and say, well, we're not that interested. Book chapters the same way. What counts? It doesn't matter what counts at somebody else's place. What counts on your place? Sitting on editorial boards. You have to be connected. You have to be known. Try to get on editorial boards. Talk to people who are editors. When you go to conferences, talk to these people. Learn about what they're. I had someone tell me when I first started out, call some journals that you are interested in and ask them what they're missing. What would they like to publish on? And if it's in any way related to what you're doing, then work on that. Holding offices in national and international associations is essential for all 3 of these things. Receiving national or international grants is important. Being invited to be speakers at presentations, and of course, research awards and honors. This isn't everything, but it gives you some idea of the kinds of things that are usually expected if you're going to go up in the research area. If you're going to go up in teaching, it's not just about teaching well where you are. This is national or international, remember. So, of course, you'd have to have outstanding institutional assessments. But what you do in teaching is going to have internal and external impact beyond your own environment. Teaching related to campus and professional mission statement, they're probably going to look at that. I mean, is it related to what we care about in the teaching area and the professional mission of your groups, your own associations? Teaching awards, internal, but particularly external. Inclusivity in relation to students. What are you doing with your students there? And are you doing anything about that in the kind of research you're talking about or the teaching you're talking about? Is that present? And do you have innovative strategies for fostering student success? You have imaginative and innovative instructional techniques or approach. It's not just about being a good teacher. It's about changing something about the way teaching is done. And not just where you are, but nationally, internationally. You have publications and contributions about innovations in teaching learning at the national and international levels. And of course, holding offices on boards. When I've come to planning and service, I've broken this up a little bit because I know that in your area, this is something that is looked at and done and used more often. And so I want you to think about this, if you're going to go this way, that there's a lot already done about this. People have done this, and there's research in your own literature. These are older articles from Checkaway and Loveridge, but they're really good. And they talk about public service and what it means and how you go about going up for public service, using public service in your area. I have a bibliography of references that I've put together for you that will be on the website for those of you who complete this workshop. And it includes these 2. It's eclectic. It has different kinds of readings in there, some focused more on just how you go about becoming a full professor, how you put things together. And I hope it will be helpful to you. But planning faculty often participate in public service as a primary focus, and the faculty in your department may not understand this. So you've got to educate them. You've got to let them know what this is, what you're doing, particularly your department head, and gain that support of your department head. Then assure that your practice is connected to your research and that you're publishing your work. It's got to be out there published. It's got to be known, and connect with others who've used this successfully. We'll talk about that in mentoring, but that is really important. Learn from others. And here are some of the things you'll need for public service or applied scholarship. national or international impact or prestige. People know your work, they're using their work, they're replicating your work, grants or other types of publishing. Impact, what is the impact on individuals or communities? What is the public service? What difference has it made? Have you written about it? Have you made presentations about it, particularly at national and international levels? Have you had invitations from others to share or to duplicate? Are others doing what you started? Is it happening in other places? Do you have any public recognition for the work that you've done? And of course, offices and national and boards and sitting on editorial boards. So these are the common things that go into being promoted in these areas. Then there's you. It's really important to maximize your power and your prestige. And I'm saying this to you. I want to emphasize, as I did earlier, you're not doing this for yourself. You're not doing this for your ego. You're doing this for the profession. You're doing this for those that follow you. You're doing this for the people out there who can read your work, use your work, and it can make a difference in their lives. It can make a difference in the profession. Everyone here who is not a full professor needs to become one, not for themselves, but for the profession. So develop a plan to meet people in your professional associations. When I was starting out, remember I told you I came from the field, and after 20 years in the field, then I went into higher ed. I started out at the research school where I was still in a K-12 environment. And I had a young woman come to me to ask me to be her mentor. And after she did that, I thought to myself, I've gone through 20 years of my profession, and I have never had a mentor. I need to get one. And I did. And I had one for the rest of my professional life. And I'll tell you about that as we go on. But one of the things one of my mentors told me was, when you go to professional associations, plan to meet the people there who are doing the work that you're doing, people whose work you admire. We're not talking about using people. We're talking about learning. And she said, go to their workshops or go to their presentations. Ask questions and go up to meet them later. You might even ask them to be your mentor. You'd be amazed at how many people that maybe you look at as the gods of your area, or the people who are so far above everyone and know so much and have published. You'd be surprised if many of those people are willing to give a helping hand. Volunteer to assist at professional associations and meetings and board and be on committees. The way I actually ended up getting connected in my profession, coming from the field and not knowing anybody, I went to one of our national meetings, and they asked for volunteers to assist on this research project. And so I volunteered. And when I volunteered, I ended up somehow becoming head of it, and that led to all kinds of things. And in years later, I became president of that association. It was just learning from others, connecting with others, doing for others and with others. Seek offices and professional associations. You're going to be expected to show that you're a leader in your field, not just in your university. Volunteer for review for the top journals in your field. Volunteer to do that. Here's where you learn what's going on out there. Here's where you learn what other people are writing. Here's where you learn how to write well when you see when people are not writing well. Someone told me one time, and I actually did it, to call the journals that you would like to publish in and ask them what they're looking at. What would they like to publish? What are they not getting manuscripts about? And if it's in any way connected to what you're doing, then start writing on that for them, and you might get published. You might include other prominent people in your work. Sometimes there are people out there that are doing the work you're doing, and you might call them and say, I'm working on this. Would you be interested in working with me? You never know. Seek mentors of national prominence. I'm working on a project with some people, retired people, and we just decided that there's people in our field that aren't getting mentoring. So we reached out to all kinds of people, and people who are nationally prominent, who are retired now, some retired, some still working, and asked them if they would mentor. And they all said yes, every one of them. So don't be afraid to ask people who you admire to be your mentor. Offer to speak and provide expertise at other universities. You might be doing something that a friend of yours would be interested in at another university. Go there, present your work, and get known. Create networks of colleagues within the profession. When you go to the meeting next month, or when you're going to your professional meeting, start talking to people. And there are people there that are doing work like you. Make some networks. Nowadays, it's so simple. It was much more difficult in my day, but now it's so easy with the internet and Zoom and everything else you've got going. As you're thinking, doing, connecting, start creating a list of possible reviewers. When you go up to become a full professor, they're going to ask you to get them a list of reviewers. You want to be able to give them people who know you and who know your work. So start thinking about that. Start creating a list so that when you're going forward, you'll have people that you can count on who know your work and understand it. So when they do a review, the review is going to be a review that is fair and honest and knowledgeable. Now, there are going to be personal and personality issues. There are people who are your supporters. So engage them, get their advice, maintain their support. If there are difficulties and problems, talk to them. Don't be hesitant to do that. There are people everywhere always who are willing to help, who want you to be a full professor. Work with them. I'm not talking about using them. I'm talking about working with them. There are people who are neutral, so you want to try to gain their support. Let them know what you're doing. Keep them informed. Try to work with them in different ways. Maybe you can connect them to some of what you're doing. Not in a fake way, in a real way. And then blockers, people that you know are going to block you or may block you. See if you can gain their support or neutralize them. Talk to your supporters about them. Maybe some of them you won't be able to, but some of them, if they see that you're really working hard, if they see the work you're doing and they see that you're getting awards and they see that things are going well for you and you're real producing, sometimes you can change them. Sometimes you can get them to be on your side. So we've talked a lot here. And here's something that you need to think about and look at. And do this on a regular basis. Conduct self-analysis. Have you been consistent over time? If you haven't been, all you do, this doesn't stop you. You just provide a rationale for the issue and you go on. For example, I have a friend, she's been there 20 some years as an associate professor. She had a period of time when she could not really do a lot. She did enough, but she didn't do the kinds of things that needed to be done to become a nationally known person early in time. She had children, she has an ill husband, lots of reasons. And so she was one of those people that was reluctant to go forward. And we talked with her about this because she has done wonderful work. She is nationally known. So you just put a rationale for what happened and you go ahead. And she did it and she was promoted. Look at the impact statistics of your work in your field. And if you're lacking there, Look at what you need to do to change that. And here's something just really important. That's why I put it in bold. What is your unique contribution? That's why you get promoted, because what you have done is unique in the field. You need to make a case for that. And what others can help you to do that, particularly mentors. Make sure that's a priority as you prepare your portfolio and as you continue your work and as you prepare. And lastly, what is the impact your work has made on the field? You have to be able to tell that story. How has it made a difference in the field, whether it is research, teaching, or public service and outreach? Okay, develop a plan for success. This is just repeating, but it's kind of a summary of what I've said. What is your area of focus? What areas of strength will you show people? Will you highlight? Where are you deficient or weak? Where are you, do you not have enough people out there who know about you? Have you not connected to the broader network? Do you have some weaknesses in the publishing area? Is there a journal that you have to be in your department to get promoted and you're not in there? What will you do? How are you going to overcome any deficient or weak areas? And I'm going to say this over and over again. Don't be discouraged by any areas. Just work on them. Do the work. You can overcome it. There are people that can help you. Do the work. Whatever potential barriers are there, you develop strategies to overcome those barriers, whether they're personal, whether they're professional, whether there's something about what you've done or not done, or whether it's yourself. If you're a procrastinator, then figure out a way to deal with that. But don't let that become something that stops you. Don't let anything stop you. There should be nothing that stops you. If you are already an associate professor, you've proven yourself. You've done everything. You can do this. If you're an assistant professor, make that your goal. Take one step at a time and make that your goal. And if you're a graduate student, just have in your head that your ultimate goal is you're going to be a full professor so that you can impact the field not only with your work, but with yourself, with your ideas, with your gifts. The field needs you. Remember that 39 to 50%? That's not good. Okay. We're ready for breakout room 2. I hope I've given you enough to think about and talk about. We have built in a 5-minute break after this, but we're going to ask you to come back and think about whether you need the break. If you need the break, you can take the break. If you don't, you can just stay with us. So here's some, or you can continue in your breakout room. So what is your greatest concern about promotion to full professor? I've given you some things that can serve as barriers. I've given you ideas about what you have to do and what counts. So what is concerning you about being promoted to full professor? And is there something else you'd like to know or something more you'd like to know? And be very open about that, because as I said earlier, this organization, this is just a wonderful thing they've done here. They care about you. They want you to become a full professor. And so if there's something that you want to know that I have not talked about, put that down. That will go into the pool of ideas that they'll work from in the future. Okay, thank you very much. I'll see you in about 20, 25 minutes. Welcome back. I hope you had a good conversation. I've given you a lot to think about in terms of preparing to become a full professor. But this may be the most important thing I'm going to talk about, and that is mentoring, which is a path to both personal and professional success. all the research demonstrates that career and life success is strongly and positively impacted by having mentoring relationships. And your career should be marked with them, that they focus on skill and personal development and professional development. I can tell you, I went through half of my career without mentors and half of my career with mentors, and it was an unbelievable difference. As I told you, the first time I actually got a mentor was when I was at the research school, and I had a young woman come in and ask me to mentor her. And then I thought to myself, I've never had a mentor. I need one too. So I got a mentor to help me to work in that environment. When I got to Auburn University, come from the field, then I'm working in the higher ed, and I realized it was a totally different environment. Every environment is different, and you have to learn it and understand it and come to know how to work within it. So I got somebody internally to help me, and I got somebody externally to help me with publishing, because I knew I didn't know what I was doing. Maybe you all knew what you were doing, but I didn't. And I needed someone to help me to do that. And then I was very successful in it because I had someone that showed me the way. That's why these connections are so important, and mentoring is so important. When I got to be a dean, I asked who's the best dean, and I asked many people, and I got the same person over and over, and I asked him to be my mentor, and it made all the difference in the world, and it will make the difference to you. When you leave here today, tomorrow morning, you start thinking about who your mentor is going to be, and I hope by next week you'll have done something about it. And this is what you do. First of all, you decide why you want a mentor. Is it for your personal, intellectual, professional growth? Is it for a skill? Is it because you want to do a better job in research? Is it how to prepare your portfolio? It all depends where you are. Is it a specific support to deal with a difficult issue, difficult person, you're not sure what to do with something? Is it just your general and professional development? Or is it understanding how to deal with the culture you're in, or is it something else? Now, all of this that I'm giving to you is going to be on your website. So you will have it and use it as a guide. Download it and use it. It will help you. I've worked with many people over the years, and I know that this will help. Secondly, what are the important relational issues? What kind of personalities do you like to work with? Does gender matter? What about ethnicity? What about culture, religious heritage? Do you want somebody? I'm in a program right now that some of the retired faculty started, where we're matching retired faculty with assistant professors, because the field isn't doing a good job like you're doing. And you would be amazed at the people that are willing to do it. So don't be afraid to ask people. And many of the people there are saying they want, for example, many of the women are saying they want a woman who's raising children, so that, and they want to talk to them as a mentor. So what's important to you? There might be something I didn't put up here, but think about that. What's important? What kind of person? And what is practical? Do you want somebody inside your institution, or you want somebody outside of your institution? As I told you, I had someone inside for one thing and someone outside for another. Do you want a friend or a family acquaintance, or somebody with no relationship? Is it important to you to have someone you already know? And do you want to have face-to-face or a distant relationship? Is there anything else you want to think about? Nowadays with Zoom, you can ask anybody around the world. So you might want to think about asking someone, someone who's doing the best work in the world. You would be amazed at how willing some of these people that we think of as giants in our field are, how willing they are to mentor people if they're asked. How do you get started? Okay, you pry it towards the focus area. And I'd say right now, start with one mentor, but that doesn't mean you have to have only one all the time. Think about maybe up to 3 people that you want to consider. And if you don't have anybody in mind, then determine what steps you're going to take to find somebody. You can ask other people. You can search the literature. As I said, who's your hero or heroine? Call them. You don't know, they might email them. You don't know that they might say yes. And check with your association. You're going to a conference shortly. There might be people there. Ask somebody, prepare, set up a time to meet with someone that you think you'd like to mentor you. Then you give an invitation. You introduce yourself. And if you know them, you explain your primary reason. If you don't, you share why you selected them. Why did you tell them why you want them? Because that might make a difference in them saying yes or no. Discuss the timeline for the relationship. Now, I usually suggest about 6 months, and that might sound silly because it isn't enough time to really develop a relationship and get done what you want to do. But the reason I suggest that is if you start with 6 months and it works really well, you just ask, can we extend this relationship? And if it doesn't work well, you can end it graciously and not be upset or upset the other person. Ask if they need time to think about it and when you need to meet and talk again. And if they accept, then establish the next meeting and the time and the place. And if they decline, then just thank them and move on. Okay? So once you've invited somebody and they've said yes, you set up your initial meeting. You send the mentor the discussion topics at least 1 week prior to the meeting. It's your job to make this efficient and for the person. At the first meeting, you talk about the parameters. How much time are you going to meet? I used to always say an hour. And then, or if they don't care, they're willing to be flexible, okay. Tell them you'll be responsible for setting up the meeting and the agenda. And then see if they want to establish any guidelines, like don't call after a certain time, don't text me, whatever it might be. They're doing something special for you, so you want to make sure that the way this relationship is set up is convenient for them. So you're creating this relationship, you listen, and you try to make it as easy as possible for your mentor. Then you have your working relationship. When I was a dean and I had my dean, and no one ever knew that he was my mentor. No one ever knew that. They didn't need to know that. It was between him and me. I would send him the agenda. I'd tell him, and then when we met, I would give him specific examples, share stories, so that the mentor can really understand what the issue is, or what it is you're dealing with, or what you're struggling with. If it's publishing, then you share something that you're struggling with there. If it's teaching, you deal with that, but you deal with specific examples so that they can really help you. And then you might want to practice a skill. If you're having difficulty getting along with someone, you might want to practice a conversation. Or if you're making a presentation, you might want to practice that. Share your concerns openly and trust this person. And then you're responsible for the timing of the next meeting and setting the meeting date. You are responsible for making this smooth and workable. And then you have the long-term status. So at the end of the 6 months or year, or whatever you decide to do, you might extend the relationship. I've done that sometimes. Other times I've gotten what I needed and I would go on to another mentor. Or you end the relationship and show appreciation. So either you extend it and you keep going, you end it, you show some kind of appreciation, and then you maybe see that person once in a while, or you change the relationship. So now maybe you become colleagues, you start working together, you start publishing together, you start doing public service together. You keep your relationship going, but it's different. I had an experience with that with a young man who was an African-American who came to our college when I was a dean, and I became his mentor. And he was just a wonderful young man, but he was in a different environment he'd been in, and he wanted to have a mentor. I mentored him through his schooling, he became his major professor. And we're at the point now where he's bringing things to me. He's the lead author. He's the leader. I'm learning things from him. I use some of his work in this presentation. So the relationship's changed. He's actually become a mentor to me in many ways. And that's a beautiful thing when it happens. So I want you to really think about this, incorporate mentoring into your life. I've given you a strategy. It's very simple, but if you use it, you continue to have a mentor, but also be a mentor. Wherever you are in your career right now, you should be able to mentor someone else. Mentoring should be just a continual part of life. Have a mentor, be a mentor. I've given you the strategies to do that. Done it quickly, but it's very comprehensive. And you also have this, as I said, on your website, so you can go through the process. When you leave here tomorrow morning, start thinking about who your mentor is going to be and what the purpose is. I said earlier, becoming a full professor is about doing the work. And I want to emphasize that again, doing the work. And what is the work? You determine the focus. Is it teaching? Is it research? Is it public service or outreach? Now you have to do good work in all areas. Remember, you have to do good work in all areas. You build an impressive body of work. Impressive. It's got to be strong. And you continually conduct an analysis of strengths and areas that need work. This is a summary, but I just want you to think about this. You gain knowledge. What are the requirements? What's the context and culture you're in, and how are you going to deal with it? How are you going to deal with the barriers there? How are you deal with the people that aren't going to support you? Know what your rights are. If you are in a situation that's toxic, where you're doing the work and you cannot overcome it, do the work, prepare it, go forward. If you don't get promoted internally, go forward. I've seen that as a dean. I've had to do that sometimes. Sometimes I've had to go against what the faculty said because I could see that it was personal. If you do the work, you do the work. Look at what things are facilitating you to succeed and what are your personal barriers and what are the contextual barriers, and make a plan to overcome them. That's the work. Do the work. Okay, that's it. Do the work. All right, any other questions? Thank you so much for this. Yes, any other questions?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to do this. It was a joy to do this. It's such important work. And I just cannot, again, thank you enough for doing this for your association. It's a wonderful gift and you should be commended for it. I hope people will use it. I hope they'll look at the recording. I hope those of you that were here got something of value from it. And I hope I am expecting every single person here to be a full professor within the years ahead. Thank you.
Many expressions of thanks in the comments, Fran.
Yes,
Thank you.
maybe. And we also want to thank you, the ones who are in the breakout rooms and making notes. Thank you again for facilitating the discussions in the breakout rooms. And thank you so much for coming today, all of you.
Thank you, Monica.